How much more difficult do you think it was because you were a woman?
Oh, exceptionally so. I would never, probably even 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, maybe 10, too soon, but maybe 15, 20 years ago, I might not wanted to have espoused it directly or talk about it because it's something that I think given the age I am now, I don't put up with what I had to put up with before, period.
Dr. Roberta Bondar was the first Canadian woman and the first neurologist in space when she flew aboard the Space Shuttle Discovery for 8 days in 1992. Dr. Bondar, who hails from the great Canadian city of Sault Ste. Marie, is one of the most accomplished Canadians ever to walk the Earth or to travel above it in space. But her path was anything but easy. We talked about her early days in the Sioux, the hurdles placed in front of her because of being a woman, the advice she would give to her younger self, the fascinating and important work she's doing with birds through the foundation that bears her name, and much more. This is my conversation with Dr. Roberta Bondar.
Roberta Bondar, astronaut, neurologist, companion of the Order of Canada, photographer, author, the list goes on. I'm so excited that you're here. Thank you very much for being here.
Pleasure.
I believe that we have, I think, three things in common, and I think then our paths diverge quite dramatically. We both have Ukrainian heritage, if I'm correct. We both went to Western, and we're both from Sault Ste. Marie.
You can't get better than that.
I think
the Sioux part, especially.
Exactly. After that, we took very different paths, but delighted that you're here today. I just, to have the opportunity to have a discussion with you is, I've been trying to arrange this for quite some time, and I realize how busy you are, and so I really appreciate it. And just to tell you what an inspiration you are to me and to basically everyone I speak to. So just thank you very much for being here. So right out of the gate, how do you ever get tired of talking about those 8 days?
I think where I come from in the Sioux, it was never an issue to talk about things that would provide some illumination for somebody. My mother was a teacher, and she was very insistent that we share our knowledge and that we help other people understand something that was complicated that we might take for granted. All of that makes me not run away from those 8 days. I feel that if someone has a question, then therefore they need to have an answer. There are times, I must admit, that I would like people to think about other things that I'm doing and to be just as excited about that. Right.
So I want to ask, I have two space-related questions that I'll work up to, and I don't think I've heard them covered before. We've all heard, what does it feel like, and the rocket and all that. People can use Google and figure that out. But I have two that I want to get to, but I'd like to talk about the other 27,082 days of your life. So
you added them up, did you?
I got Siri to do it today.
Did you count in the leap years too?
I did. I did,
good
yeah.
For you.
So I was an English major, but I have a little bit of math skills. As I mentioned earlier, I'd like to talk about some of the other work you've done, and particularly fascinating to me is your work with birds. So most people, I would have to say, take birds for granted. We hear them. I probably can't identify more than 5 or 6, and that's thanks to my mom. But you're devoting a significant amount of your time and resources to this, and I would like to understand a little bit about why. Now, I understand you were interested in birds when you were young, but the fact that you are studying these migratory patterns of certain sorts of cranes and other birds, I think it's related. I'll let you explain it, but I think it's related to the perspective you had of the planet from up there, and understanding that they are sort of like the canary in the mine, so to speak. How did you get involved with this, and can you talk a little bit about the work that you're doing right now and why you believe it's important?
I'll try to remember all of those questions to answer them all.
Basically, it's like, why birds?
Why birds? Why not birds? Birds were important to me when I was growing up. I mean, obviously, I liked flight, and being a human being, I had to have an airplane and had to have a rocket ship and those kinds of things in order to be able to get off the planet and away from gravity. When I was growing up in the Sioux, it was very clear that the natural environment has a huge influence on people that live in that area, or it should have. My parents were no exception, so when they brought my sister and I to the shores of Lake Superior, where I was first influenced by the stars, They also had taken us on different types of what I'd call great field trips with a tent to different places in the United States, because the highway hadn't even been finished to Toronto. And we would look at things in the natural environment. My mother would be talking about how extraordinary these things were, and my dad would create things so that we could get nearer to them, like platforms or whatever, and help us with our pretend games that we were explorers. It made me very close to the natural world in the sense that there were things that they could do that I couldn't do, and things that I could learn from them that we still didn't have any idea what the answers would be, let alone the right questions. So I worked as a summer student in the local insect laboratory, and it got me out into the field a lot. It also got me speaking to a lot of people about different kinds of organisms in the environment, and I pursued a degree in zoology at the University of Guelph. That was my first degree. So during the course of that, I was able to meet with a lot of people from different types of disciplines in science, and I still kept thinking about insects because I was working with them every summer for 6 years, and about flight. And then I kind of, I just kept going back to birds. I just thought, as much as insects were in my life, and there were a heck of a lot of them, I liked the birds a lot. I liked their flight. I liked the feathers. I liked understanding about how they could fly and how human beings couldn't. And then when I got into the space program in medicine, I just moved on into more human things and had a different type of focus. But it was the back of my mind all the time to be able to do something in my life that would be contributing to a different sphere outside of more the technical aspect of space flight and medicine. Certainly getting into space, an extraordinary experience. Some people are affected by it in deep ways. Other people are not as affected. Some people are very technical-minded. They want to do things that create new gizmos and different applications for our life on Earth, and I think that's great. But I'm sort of not quite one of them. I feel, and I still, to this day, marvel at the view of the Earth from space, feel that we are in a very privileged position as human beings, and a lot of the times we don't deal with that privilege very well, whether it's how we deal with each other or how we deal with the other life forms that share the planet with us. We feel we have to have the upper hand all the time, and I feel that there are so many creatures that don't have voices for themselves. The bird issue for me is not just about trying to educationally bring birds to people's attention, but trying to draw people into a better connection with the natural environment, and to look at the kinds of things that we're doing in an irrevocable way that really dismisses life in a sense that it may disappear and it'll be too late for us to try to figure it out in the future. To look at the Earth and not see anything that's life-giving on it is quite a shock. You get up high enough in a spacecraft and you don't see human beings, obviously, and you don't see any other life form. You see movement only if it's the aurora borealis or the aurora australis, or you see muffled lightning under clouds and storms, but you really have to use a telephoto lens to record some of the stuff that human beings have made. I mean, you may be seeing some lights at night, but it's not something that I found as engaging as coming back to the planet and looking at what life really is on the planet. In some ways, because I don't have children, I don't have people in front of me that carry my genes, my genetic makeup, for example. I don't have the opportunity to have children or grandchildren of my own. It doesn't mean I don't influence other people. It's sort of that, I don't know, maybe that egotistical part of a human being that one wants to have children to see one's genes go off, and you know that you've tried to make the world a better place because you try to bring good people into the world that somehow reflect your values. Because I didn't have that in my life, I suppose that's one of the reasons why I feel very intense about trying to live beyond myself. And I don't think it's as much ego, certainly since my space flight, but it's a reality check on ethics. It's a reality check on being connected to things that will go way beyond my life. And if I can do that in some way and show people what birds can do, what the incredible things that we shouldn't be dismissive about or try to shorten their lifespan, then I would be very, very happy if something that I did would go beyond my 8 days in space. And now when people stay up in space long periods of time, the 8 days seems insignificant. But in the early days, it was quite significant. And so without diminishing that 8 days, without diminishing the view I had of the Earth from space, I feel that my terrestrial life right now it's much better spent in trying to get people to pay attention or somehow connect people better with the fusion of art and science, try to bring people closer to the natural environment, to give us a reality check on our ethics.
Right.
That's the short answer.
Yeah. No, I love it. You're traveling all over the world. You're taking photographs. You're researching. You're journaling. My understanding, and you can obviously educate us about this, but there's a specific sort of crane. I forget the exact name of it, but this is one of the birds that you've kind of zeroed in on, and that I believe that like the migratory patterns of this bird have been disrupted by human beings. And is it your hope to fix this, to resolve it, to like? Is there a call to action, or is it just to chronicle it? Like, I'd be interested what you'd like the end game to be.
Well, it should always be a call to action. I mean, education's a call to action. It's really about opening one's mind. And then I can't do everything. No single human being can do everything. But what we have to do is try to start somewhere. So we start with education. But the call to action for some of the stuff I do is to basically say, okay, here is the migratory pathway that these 7 or 8 species that we're following use. And the one that you're referring to is the whooping crane, which when I was born in the 1940s in Canada, it was down to about, I think it was around 18 birds. That was all. That's it. There was nothing else left but these 18 birds. So there's not a lot of genetic diversity here from those 18 birds, except for maybe mutations that have happened along the way. Now maybe the total population is up to 500. That's not a lot of birds. So it's a huge bird. It's the largest bird in North America, 5 foot tall, wingspan 7.5 feet. Wow. Extraordinarily elegant creatures. And so when I try to present the work that I'm doing now, the space perspective, the aerial perspective, and the surface perspective, to try to bring these 3 things together in an artistic way, is to try to weave that story into a greater thing than just one person's particular lifespan on the planet. It's to say this is generational. This is trying to keep life going. And so the call to action, there's a chapter in the book that I'm writing on. The first book is on the whooping crane and the lesser flamingo. I have the 2 at the moment are going to be in the one book. It's really, there's a call to action because there's a chapter on each of them, each of the 2 species, on the threats, challenges, and hopes. By describing the kinds of things that are influencing their lifespan, I hope people will then say, well, what can I do about it? That maybe people will be more consistent in policies, or they may be somehow stimulated, inspired to try to do something, because I can't go to a government and say, well, these habitats are not protected, or you shouldn't be building this dam on a river that supplies most of the water to Lake Natron, the only birthplace of these lesser flamingos. I mean, there are lots of things. You look at oil tankers and barges and things in the States, in the southernmost part of the whooping crane corridor. All of that, people need to know what the issues are before trying to figure out if they need to do something, or should they do something, and then they have to figure out how. So by trying to present this in books and in exhibitions, I'm hoping that it will stimulate people to develop their ethics, their environmental ethics, in a way that actually, that is the call to action, for people to be connected to the natural world and actually try to do something
Right. So you mentioned a book that you're working on. I saw a video in the past week that you mentioned you're working on actually 2 or 3 at the same time. Mm-hmm. What are they about, and when do you expect them to be available to people?
Well, at my age, you got to work on parallel things. No, there's just. I mean, you start thinking. I mean, I look at one's lifespan a little differently as you get a little bit older.
Right.
And you start thinking, well, there's no 5-year plan here. There's no if I do a 10-year plan, I may not be able to get there. So what can I do in a shorter framework that's in parallel that will achieve the results I want? So, yeah, the books are on birds. I have written, but have not been able to get back to update a fiction book for young adults or children on a crane's journey, but right now the books are basically on my photography and my writing as a writer. So no one's writing the book for me. I'm completely doing this myself.
I figured, yeah.
Yeah, and so I have. It's not because I want control. It's because I want the photography and the words to be fused. I don't see somebody. And I know people will, in time, describe my art, my photography. But right now, I want people to kind of see what I was thinking,
right.
and to try to look at the world slightly differently. So that's why I'm working the books in parallel.
Do you have target dates, or are they still just, I guess, still in progress?
Well, it's I've had a bit of a hiatus for the past 6 or 8 months, and I probably will over the next 3 because some personal things going on for a friend. But I'm trying to get it to a person in the States to review so I can submit it to publishers, because it's not an insignificant piece. There's going to be well over 250 images in the first book, and then there's going to be text of maybe 150 to 250 words for each of those photographs. Then all the references, the maps, everything to make it a good read and a good book.
It's going to be a lot of work to put in.
It's a lot of work, and I had a research assistant for a year to try to help me get some of these satellite images that I needed and the space imagery. And then when David Saint-Jacques was in space, I was able to leverage his flight, and I think it was the single biggest project that he had during the space flight, is to take the images of these migratory pathways. Because there were these 7 species. It's an international project, so it's not just North American.
For people who are listening and have never thought of birds or cranes, other than you might see them in your backyard,
and cranes, fewer of them now, I might add. Yes.
What can people do? Anything like what can people do to assist?
Well, I think that one can look into other organizations such as the Nature Conservancy that actually have the ability to, in part of their mandate, to purchase land, wetlands, for example. But also it looks at our own behaviors of where we go and what we do when we get there. There are things like ecotourism, and we have to really be very careful when we do these kinds of things to make sure that we're doing things in an ethical manner. It's hard, when you're in the inner city and you don't see a lot of birds, and fewer and fewer and fewer of them now. There's so many billions of birds. But I think one of the things is don't let your cat outside. I don't believe in declawing a cat, but cats have killed...
They kill a lot of things.
Well, in the state of Wisconsin, they kill 2 to 3 million 2 to 3 million birds a year.
Wow.
I mean, really. So, yeah, maybe we don't need every type of creature that's on this planet.
So people can do something. Keep your cat inside.
Keep your cat inside.
Oh, my God.
I mean, it's... These are small things.
You're a dog person, I'm guessing?
No, I had a cat. I grew up with a cat. It was like, I don't know, it was 16 or 17 years when Stripey died, and he was a wonderful cat.
Stripey. Did you
name it? Well, he had stripes. I was a young kid,
course, yeah.
His brother was Whitey. He was white. He got hit by a car, but anyway. So no, I mean, I like animals. I like well-behaved humans too, but I do like animals. So yeah, people can do things.
Do you ever make it back to Sault Ste. Marie? I saw you were at the Bush Plane Museum recently, but do you have any connections there, roots there, other than just being from there and having a building named after you?
Oh no, but my soul is there actually.
Wow.
And I go back there all the time because I don't think there's a more beautiful place in the country. I mean, there are lots of extraordinary things I've seen, but to be on fresh water and to be surrounded by the Canadian Shield, the rocks, the lichens. I mean, to be part of an environmental history just by being there is quite incredible. I have an uncle and an aunt and a cousin who's still living in the Soo, and and I have some very good friends in the Soo, and I try to get up to support the community in whatever way I can. I mean, obviously, we could be spread very thinly, very quickly. But I'm very keen on the Art Gallery of Algoma, for example, and it's going
down by the library.
Well, it is, but it needs to have a different place now. I mean, the building's really old, and so I agreed to be patron of the fund that they're trying to develop to get a new building. Because I believe in the arts community. I believe that we have to have some way of stimulating ourselves to think differently, to approach problems differently, regardless of what they are. And arts does that for us. I also believe very much in the Bushplane Museum, which is, some people will say, the other side of the coin. It's technical, and there's a lot of science in it. But again, it's a way to look at how we apply creativity in developing things to solve problems. So when we look at the heritage of water bombers, or the heritage of fighting fires, especially now when one looks at Australia and thinks about all the lives that have been lost, the terrible destruction, the animals that have died, birds that have perished. There's just so much destruction. But you go to the Bushplane Museum and you have some kind of hope, because there are things that we're trying to develop that deal with how to look at forest fires in a good way, but when they get out of control, how to manage that. So I think there are things in the Soo that are positioned differently than other communities. And I've always said, if it was closer to Toronto, you'd never be able to buy real estate.
That's right. So as a Siouxite, I have to know your favorite Sault Ste. Marie pizza.
Oh, I don't eat pizza.
Oh, no.
But, hey, I like Giovanni's.
There you go. I like the little
if you said
accent
Italian,
put it on there. Yeah.
Oh, there's Marconi. I mean, there's
exactly. So your father was conscripted during the war. I guess he didn't go overseas, but he served here. Wanted to become an accountant. That's my understanding, and wasn't able to because he didn't have that piece of paper. And so I think he ended up working at the PUC.
Yes, he was office manager at the PUC.
And is that down on Queen Street?
Yeah.
I think it's still there. So his inability to not get that piece of paper, how much did that drive you?
Well, I think it always stuck in my mind that if one didn't have the right kind of paper, meaning certificate or something,
right,
that you couldn't open the door you wanted to open. And of course, when I was really young, I did not understand it all, and not necessarily that I do now, but I think I have a much different view. But education became very, very important to me. It was always important to my mother as well. I mean, my mother wanted to be a school teacher the time she was in grade 8, and she told us a story once where her teacher brought her home, and she was brought up by her grandparents when she was very young. And her grandmother answered the door, and the teacher said, Mildred is a naturally born teacher, and we think she should go to university. I mean, she should really become a teacher. And my great-grandmother just said, well, we can't afford it. So my mother, through her whole life, looked for other venues for teaching. She would teach at Sunday school. She would be a tawny owl in the Girl Guides, all these things. And then when she was able to, she did a lot with the Family Y, and then they asked her if she would do some supply teaching at one of the high schools. And then the principal at the high school said, Mildred, you should really get your degree, get that piece of paper. So she did. It's 7 years going down to Toronto every summer. I'd be coming home in April. She'd be going down with my sister in June, and I wouldn't see them for several months to get that piece of paper. And got her principal's papers, although never became a principal, but was head of the commercial department and mentored the cheerleaders because she was quite an athlete. So all of these things really meant that education was a way of not just achieving and opening a door, but a way of looking at the world differently, so one could create differently. It wasn't just to be self-serving and saying, hey, I can get in this room if I've got this piece of paper, but rather, if you have that piece of paper, what are you able to do with it? What do you do to make that paper just a chapter in the book?
Right.
You can't get to a book to write in it unless you have the first chapter.
You mentioned Girl Guides in your answer, and I understand you've been involved with them for a number of years and are quite involved. And I actually have my partner said that she met you when she was 12 years old in Saskatchewan. You're giving a talk out there as part of the Girl Guides, and actually, I'm surprised.
It was a camp.
Yeah, that's
Echo
right.
Valley.
Oh, really? Wow, that's
1988.
quite the memory. Oh my God.
Oh, please. It's quite the memory. You get to be my age. You really like remembering some of those things. Oh, Echo Valley. Yeah.
And then she said she met you for a second time in a hospital. Her friend was very ill, and you happened to be there. And I guess she ran up. You're in the middle of work. You're doing important, brain doctor things. And she came up to you and started mentioning, "Oh, I met you, and I was so and so." And she said you were kind of looking at her like, get this crazy person away from me a little bit. But that's funny. So, are you still involved with Girl Guides, or has that?
Not really. See, if they told me they're from the Sioux, they get a hug.
She's not from the Sioux.
Then she didn't get a hug.
There you go. The hugs are reserved. Okay. You mentioned the other thing I'm interested in too is I know many scientists who are all in on science, math, science, and that's what they're occupied with. You reserve a lot of room for art, and I use the term kind of liberally, but photography, writing, journaling. You talked about the smell of crayons and how you enjoy that. Brings you back to childhood. And you even mentioned that some of your best marks in school and best courses were art courses, not science courses. Do you think that's a unique combination or focus for someone that most people see as just a scientist?
No, I don't. I mean, you can look at the Governor General. I mean, she's an engineer, but she also was singing taffel music. I mean, there are a number of people, if you look at their CVs, they have a lot of very interesting things. And I can point out someone else from the Sioux. Actually, it's a family, the Black family. And Harriet Black is the mother. Her husband was a physician in the Sioux, and she had children that have gone from being a brain surgeon to a neurologist, head of neurology at Sunnybrook, down to her sisters who are well known as musicians. And I remember at Mrs. Black's funeral here in Toronto. Their son Peter, who was a neurosurgeon, got up and he says, when my mother was teaching me Beethoven and practicing on the piano, he said, it wasn't just about learning finger movements on the piano keys that make me a good surgeon. He said, it was about discipline. So there are things that we learn from various aspects of things available to us in life without having to split this division, have this division between art and science. In fact, if you look back at Michelangelo's day, it was not split. It was thanks to some, I'm sure, very well-known, well-meaning people to split art and science with the big chasm that it is. When you start looking at the Hubble Space Telescope and look at the images, people don't look at the science first. They look at the art first. They look at at how it affects them in terms of shapes and abstract lines and light and color. And then, if people look at it long enough, which is why I believe so strongly in science, is that they start to become curious. And it's that curiosity that we have had since we were young. Sometimes it gets put on a shelf and gets quite dusty. But that is what ties these things together. That's what ties art and science together if you want to keep them split. It's this whole thing about stimulating a question, stimulating what is that? And it's the what is that is the big question in life. Why life? Why are we here? What does that mean? So when you look at a Space Hubble telescope image, you look at the depth and say, well, what is that? Is that gas? Well, how big is that? What's the scale of it? And someone tells you the Horsehead Nebula, and they tell you how many diameters of the sun across, and then how many diameters of Earth would be across the sun, and to try to get it in some kind of framework scientifically that you can get your head around it. But it stems from seeing something that would stimulate you. That's why the combination of them is so valuable. Without it, we will not create anything. We will not invent things. We will not be ethical. We will not be nice to each other, because it is something that we start losing all meaning.
Why are we here? As I know everyone
you invited me.
Pum. As someone, I have to. The biggest question I have for you is really around perspective, and that's a word that comes up a lot with you. Perspective. The one quote you have is like, yeah, everyone knows it's a planet, but man, you got to get off it to get a look at it. Are you ever the same after that? Like, when you're in line at the grocery store and you're like around everybody, or you're walking down the street, or you're at a concert or a gallery, and you're around all these people, like you've experienced something profoundly different from them, and you have a different perspective than them. So that's the big question for everybody. But what's your answer? Like, why, in the big picture, not just at this table, but why are we here?
It's like a lot of things. There obviously is no answer. Otherwise, I have a Nobel Prize for it. I don't think that it's maybe the question to ask. Why we're here means that we have to have some kind of direction that somebody else has given us, rather than us having our own direction. That if you're here, you're here. And why you're here? Well, maybe you're here to interview me today. Maybe I'm here to answer your questions. Maybe. We don't know. But one thing is a given, is that we are here. So to think that somebody else would have put us here for some reason abrogates our responsibility to ourselves and to each other. And that's where sort of ethics and moral code and values comes into it.
Right.
I find that when people use religion to abrogate any type of decision that they might make, to abrogate their responsibility to their fellow human being or to another life form, I think that is I just don't think that's a good thing.
You bring up religion, and I don't want to get too personal, but having experienced the life that you have, do you think that there is something greater, or do you think this is just a random scientific anomaly that we're in the middle of here?
That's a very deep philosophical question you're asking me.
Yes.
Let me just put it this way. I get disturbed when I'm at things where people use religion in a way that I find is self-serving. People who get touchdowns in football and then
thank God.
Yeah, thank God, or God saved me and didn't save somebody else who was in the seat beside me. I mean, all of that, people don't believe in the randomness of life. They believe that there's destiny, that these things have been predetermined, when that, again, abrogates any kind of responsibility. I do think that one thing that I heard once at the gravesite of a dear friend of the family, relatively in the recent past, the minister was saying, we know what it's like when we die, because people with a near-death experience tell us what heaven will be like, and that they will be walking with so-and-so. And I'm going like, no, I'm a neurologist here. When people dream, when they have these near-death experiences, it's all part of how the neural circuits work. That's all part of how the neural circuits work. So it really bothers me when people try to influence others without a proper grounding in what science can provide.
Right.
So the idea of trying to tell people about why they're here or what's going to happen in another life is, I think, I look at it and I listen to people and I'm going, like, really?
Are you recognized often when you're out doing things? Like, not when you're out giving a talk where everyone knows it's you. You're at Metro getting groceries. Do you get recognized?
Once I had, well, I'm sure I do, because people look at me kind of oddly, but I remember once I must have been painting or something. I was in this old T-shirt, and I had run in to get something at Metro, and on my way out, this I don't think it was Metro. It was a grocery store. I'm not
Right.
going to say which one.
Yeah.
So this guy comes out, this young man, and he takes a picture of me standing in line, and then runs away. And he says, I finally got her. I saw her here a couple of weeks ago, and I brought my camera just in case.
Oh my
and
God.
he took his camera back to his locker. Nobody asked permission. Nobody.
It's an employee?
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
employee. Probably a summer student. I don't know, but it's that kind of. It's that kind of thing.
We better
I'm
just
famous.
come up to you. Like,
Well,
say,
I'm famous, not rich. People who are famous usually have some financial wherewithal to
Right.
keep people at a distance.
At
I do
bay.
not.
You need a goon with a taser to follow you
Yeah,
around.
I know.
You talked, going back a little bit, we talked about arts, creativity, philosophy. I'd be interested in your take on the smartphone era that we're in, because I remember one of the, when you're a kid, it's frustrating, but you realize that boredom is a gift. I used to ask my mom, I'm bored. What can I do? What can I do? And then after a certain amount of boredom, you figure out something to do. You go and play, or you draw a picture, or you think. And that seems to be gone these days when there's Twitter and TikTok and Instagram, and there's no such. People are at the dentist office waiting, they're on their phone. People are, and I'm as guilty as anyone. People are in line at the grocery store and you're on your phone. There's no such thing as downtime anymore. Do you think that is going to be a net loss for society?
I hope I'm around long enough to see what happens in 50 years. I mean, I'm not going to be long enough, but in 50 years,
I hope you are.
It's 50 years. It's going to be interesting to see what people think about this era of everybody being on their phone. I find it quite dangerous to be a driver at an intersection and see somebody walk off the curb either with earphones on, earbuds in, talking on the phone, or pushing a stroller, trying to talk, carrying a bag of groceries. It's dangerous, and I just don't think people think when they're on a phone. I believe in the connectedness of the internet. It really is extraordinary how much it does affect everything that we do, everything that we think, everything that we can create, everything that we can ask. There's not answers to everything, but pretty much you'll find what people think of things very quickly. I do feel that the downtime is really important. I look at role models such as Barack Obama. When he used to have his conferences, people would have to get a Post-it note and put their name on their phone and leave it outside the room. It's that kind of hey, there's a time for this and a time we can't, because you can't create all the time. You can't be thinking that you're going to be the person that's going to get the widget that's going to be making you a billionaire, or the thing that's going to set you apart from somebody else as a speaker or whatever it is you're doing by being on a device all the time. There has to be a point where you are going to be stimulated by something that doesn't come back at you electronically. We try with the foundation that bears my name, the Roberta Bondar Foundation, to try to encourage people to use technology in a different way, to actually use it to look at the environment and become connected to it. We have a program where we try to talk about the technology of photography, but also with the art and the art that's in the environment, and the kinds of scientific questions you can ask from that art, so that we give kids cameras. And we have a number of programs, including with First Nation students in the Northwest Territories, and schools and summer camps, and they're taught about how to look at things, how to see things, and then to take the camera and use that LCD screen or the viewfinder to try to capture it the best way they can, to try to share it with someone else, to share the feeling they've had. What can you take a picture of that shares how you feel in that moment? Like, what do you think when you look at this bird, or what do you think when you look at this tree, or you see these magnificent clouds, or you see this water? What is it that captures your imagination? So we try to get them to translate how they feel and how they see into something they can share with someone else, because you can't share how you think unless you create something, either through speech, through writing, or through some type of image. It's really, you can't. I can't see what's in your brain. Thank goodness you can't see what's in mine,
not a lot
even
going
though
on
you're
in
trying
here.
to get all these questions at me. Were you related to Myrna Weeks?
I'm related to all the Weeks.
Oh, are you?
So
Because Myrna was in Guides with me.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Apparently there was 4 Weeks brothers who came over, and then all the kids are. So I don't know them all. My dad might, but yeah, it'd be really,
DNA will give you away.
I guess apparently 23andMe. You probably shouldn't do that. Like you've heard, like don't do that, right? You know the 23andMe thing.
Yeah, don't. I've had a friend who did that and found out that he wasn't really he was a half child, not the full child.
No way. I thought it was. Well, that's disturbing enough. But what about the? I heard that it's what these come like your DNA's on file now, and what they can do with it after the fact, like down the road, like
Yeah, you don't want that done.
Okay. Okay.
I get rid of all my nail clippings.
Do you?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Do you really?
Take my nail clippings. Just kidding you.
Howard Hughes or something.
He didn't cut his nails.
Oh yeah, he had the exact opposite problem. Oh right. Okay. So as a neurologist, are there obviously it's the top end of the medical spectrum, right? Everyone says, well, it's not brain surgery, brain science. This is.
It's usually brain science or rocket science. Hey, we got them covered.
I know it's ridiculous. What are there any specific patients that jump out at you over the years? Like, are there one or two that just for whatever reason you remember more clearly than others?
There are a lot of patients that I remember. Some with joy in my heart, some not so much. Some with very degrees of sadness. I do remember a young boy that came in, and he was he had some aspirin. He had a viral illness, and he came in and he couldn't see, and his parents were very upset. And I was a resident in London at the time, and I made a diagnosis without much else to go on except the reading that I had done, understanding how the brain works, and seeing the behavior of this unfortunate young boy. And so I ordered special tests on him, and they came back positive and confirmed the diagnosis. But I think the worst part was that I'd had a big argument with the staff man that I had to was supposed to report to, that demanded I do a lumbar puncture on this young man, and I just knew for sure that he had brain swelling, and I wasn't going to do it. And I probably could have been kicked out of my residency for refusing to do what the staff had wanted, but I felt that right there, being on site, I could make a decision that would save this boy's life, not the other way around. The boy eventually died, but he was a case of Reye's syndrome, and his parents started the Reye's.
Wow. And what year was that roughly, or sort of era?
Well, that was in the 70s, early 70s.
And then that's when
in the mid 70s.
That's when they came out with guidelines saying children shouldn't have aspirin until like 12 years old or whatever.
That's right. And so, I was going into neuro-ophthalmology, so I made it my business to be able to see the back of the eye. In those days, we didn't have CT scans the way we have now. I mean, they're in the emergency department. Instead of a chest X-ray, you go and have a CT scan. But in those days, CT was in its infancy. And I just made it a priority to be able to look in the back of everybody's eyes, regardless if they were flailing around in a bed, to be able to see the back of the eye, because that's the only place you could tell where they had raised intracranial pressure.
Right.
And I could see that he had florid raised intracranial pressure, and I was not going to touch this young boy with a stick in his back. I just wasn't going to do it. And so I will never forget that. It was dealing with the parents, it was dealing with the nursing staff, it was dealing with everybody who wanted to help this young boy. I mean, the only thing you could do in those days, you had to go to neurosurgery and take a bone flap out and allow the brain to expand and try to give him some substances through to the veins to try to shrink the swelling. But I mean, it's a terrible thing to see swelling in the brain and how quickly people will die. So I mean, that was one very sad case, but I also had very good ones too. People who've done very well, but it's the sad ones that kind of stick, because they're the ones that you feel so helpless, the ones that you feel you want to do so much more, not just for the patient, but it's the family too. The family is the one that needs to understand what's going on. So they have a lot of angst, and they have anxiety, and they have guilt, and there are so many things that go on. It's really important to look at the total care and to use the healthcare team, not just you as a physician or me as a physician, but really rely on the technical support, the nursing support, everybody. It's part of how ethically we work with sick people.
Right. The last interview I did was with the CEO of the Registered Practical Nurses Association of Ontario, and who's also a longtime friend. And I asked her, I said I was going to be speaking with you today, and I said, what question would you ask Dr. Bondar? And she asked the following. If you had to write a letter to your 18-year-old self that could be transported through time, what would it say?
Not sure I'd give my 18-year-old self any different advice than I'd give my 28-year-old self or my 38-year-old self. But if push came to shove and I wanted to put something in a time capsule and send it backwards, it would be to have never to lose my self-confidence. Because my curiosity is something I would never lose, but the self-confidence is something that I've been beaten up many times in my life. And I think those are the times when I needed to have some support that I was unwilling to share with my parents, for example, because I knew that they would be right there on the front line for me, and I knew I had to fend for myself, or there were things that I felt that I just wanted to deal with on a personal level. So I think not giving up a confidence in myself. And so I say to kids all the time, I said, just have confidence in who you are. And confidence, that does not mean you're arrogant. Some people, unfortunately,
manufacture confidence.
They can't separate the two.
Yeah.
But it's having the confidence that you are a good person, that you do have qualifications, that you are capable. All those kinds of things are important to all of us. It doesn't mean that you go around with a big ego. It means that you say to yourself, I am a good person and I can do these things. I suppose it's akin to believing in oneself. I think it's also about how to express that to other people, because I think that's one of the things about leadership. We talk about flexible leadership. We talk about leaders being nimble. We talk about the charisma and the moral character of good leaders. But people also need to be confident that what they're doing, what they're being led to do or being shown to follow to do is the right thing. And they want leaders to be confident, not arrogant, and competent. So I think that's what I would probably put in a note to an 18-year-old me, was just don't lose confidence in yourself, because sometimes people will be out to try. If you're a tall poppy in Canada, trust me, people are going to be at you with a chainsaw.
Canadians are supposed to be nice.
Nice is not the same. You still can be nice and cut a tall poppy down.
Right.
So I think it's important for all of us is to believe in what we believe we want to do or can do.
How much more difficult do you think it was because you're a woman?
Oh, exceptionally so. I would never, probably even 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, maybe 10 too soon, but maybe 15, 20 years ago, I might not want to have espoused it directly or talk about it, because it's something that I think, given the age I am now, I don't put up with what I had to put up with before. Period.
Nice. So these are my space questions, and then we'll wrap it up because I want to respect your time. Unless there's anything else you want to chat about, I'm happy to stay here all day if you'd like.
Oh no, I can't.
She's like, I've had enough.
Thanks.
So the launch, January 22nd, 1992. It was the 28th anniversary of it a couple weeks ago. And correct me if any of this is wrong, but I find this fascinating. So, and I think it ties together a bunch of the things we've talked about so far today. So as you're sitting there getting ready to take off and having this momentous, this huge moment, and you're I'm guessing filled with excitement and fear and all those different things. the families of all the American male astronauts were in a secure sort of private location, and your family wasn't. Your mom and your sister were sort of in the public stands. And you know, the shot that I always think of is when the Challenger exploded in '86, and we saw Krista McAuliffe's mom or parents in the stands, and I'm guessing that's distracting to you. Like, as you're supposed to be having this moment, and you're more concerned about your family in the stands. How do you reflect on that? Like, are you pissed off? Are you frustrated? Is it just in the fog of time? I'd like to find out a little bit about that from the person who was there.
Well, it was just one of many of these things that happened to me in the space program that went to being a woman, or went to being a Canadian, and a Canadian woman made it worse. But I can tell you that the day of the launch, when my family was not with the other families, it wasn't because I was a payload specialist and wasn't allowed. That's how it first started. But the other payload specialist on the flight, the German, managed to tell him that his family didn't speak much English and they should go with the boys. So my family was the only one that was left out. And it was, how can you not be angry? How can you not be saying, if this was the only occurrence, I would have said, oh my goodness, how could they do that to me? But this wasn't the only occurrence. I mean, there were lots of things that happened to me that would not happen now, one would hope, to anybody, whether they're a man or a woman. The other one, I don't know if you know that when I was to be greeted on landing, they told me because I didn't have a spouse or a dog that I couldn't have anyone greeting me when I landed. And I'm looking at them like they're aliens. I thought, what is all this about? Well, that's the NASA rules. And I said, okay, well, my space agency will fix it up. Well, of course they did not. They did nothing. They did really very, very little for me during the whole time I was training. It was unconscionable, and I think these days probably unethical. But they said to me on day 5 or 6 in the flight, I was called up to the flight deck on an encrypted loop, and I was asked, okay, you've made enough noise about this. Whom do you want to, actually they said who, do you want to greet you when you land, your mother or your sister? I'm going like, mother or my sister? Like, what?
Oh my God.
Of course I picked my mother because my sister would understand. So my sister was like, I don't know, 30 feet away behind a barbed wire fence, standing, waving to me. And there's my mother. And, she had tears in her eyes. And there I am, so I'm wobbling off after all these experiments I'd done. It was tough. And the other thing that of interest, that was the third thing, I'm only talking to you about the big three.
Right.
The third thing was that because the German gentleman and I were payload specialists, this was an American Union thing. We were not mission specialists at that time, so we could not use the exercise equipment. So the exercise, this is what I meant about unethical these days.
That's so weird.
Because the exercise equipment is not just because we kind of just think it's kind of fun to go in a rowing machine or whatever.
Well, you're
supposed to because of the deconditioning. So they would not let the German guy or me use the rowing machine, and it's sort of like, are you people nuts? I mean, here I am, a doctor, and I'm studying this stuff as part of my space medicine stuff. And it's like unethical that you would put somebody up in space and not allow them to try to not be deconditioned, especially when we were doing all these experiments to look at motion sickness and to look at all kinds of issues with the human body in spaceflight. I just found it was really, it's a very sad commentary on what it was like to be a pioneer back in the 80s. I mean, it's just you couldn't get away with it now.
So you're back on Earth at this point. Does the relationship with the space agency get a little frosty, or does it end, or what happens?
Well, I shouldn't say, who knows what's supposed to happen in life, right? But if one can go on what happened with Mr. Garneau after his flight, he was he was allowed to go down for mission specialist training, as was everybody else that had been in flight and the new crew. But basically I was not. And there were never any reasons given. They just hauled me in and said, your contract's over. And that, I must say, that was really hard, because I had come from a high thinking that I was going to go back in space on Neurolab. Another Canadian did, but he wasn't a neurologist. These were neurology experiments, and why wouldn't the world's first neurologist even be on that Neurolab? But they made it impossible, because they basically said, your contract's over, you have to stop your space medicine research as of today, and that's it. So, that was pretty hard.
How devastating was that?
Well, it was pretty devastating, because I wrote a letter, I thought it was a pretty nice letter, they told me that they keep me on for a year to do administrative work, and I thought, what, with all my credentials and all this space medicine stuff that we've been doing for years, you want me to, and taxpayers paid about $13 million for me to train, and now you're just going to throw it out the window? Why? I didn't do anything wrong. I was just happened to be a woman, and so they basically said, well, you'll have to resign, or you're going to be doing administrative work. Well, they knew I wouldn't do that.
Right.
So I wrote this very nice letter and just said, I'm really surprised that I was not allowed to carry on the dream. And I had somebody from the government, one of the junior ministers, on my doorstep in Toronto within the week, asking me to redo my letter of resignation. And if I did, blackmail. And if my research work was peer reviewable, then they might consider the space agency being part of a university partnership, industry partnership with the university to help fund the research. But I'd still have to get someone to hire me to pay my salary, because grants in Canada did not cover salary for me. They'd cover postdocs and techs and travel, but not my support. So It was kind of like, you need to redo your letter of resignation, because it's going to be a public document. So I did, because
they wanted to sort of sanitize it.
Yeah, absolutely did. And so I did. So I have the original letter. I kept it. I have kept it. So the Sioux will get it eventually, because they have all my papers in the Sioux.
Wow. I'd love to see that. Now, you have donated some of your memorabilia and things to, I think it's the Bush Plane Museum in the Sioux.
I didn't. You know how that happened?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can tell the story.
Well, it's just that I called the National Archives with all my stuff, and the gentleman at the end of the phone didn't recognize me, didn't know my name, said that I wasn't the first Canadian woman astronaut, and no, they weren't interested. So I just picked up the phone, called the library in my hometown, and they said, of course we'll like it. And then a week later, I get a call from the National Archives, and they said, well, there was a mistake. Of course, we'd love to have your things. I said, well, that's great. You can borrow them anytime from the library in Sault Ste. Marie.
Nice.
Yeah, that's where they're going to be.
Yeah.
And so the library now has a nice new branch, and they have a new area for their archives, and they will get all my papers, eventually all the things that dealt with my childhood in the Sioux, that all my papers from the school, because my mother kept them.
And your rockets that you used to build.
Those are already in the Bush Plane Museum.
Yeah.
Well, they're small. They're not explosive rockets.
But you would throw them
rockets.
away, and your mom saved them.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
That's great.
Yeah.
As a parent, I understand what that's like.
Well, it's really, I think it's important. I keep things in my home office that I had when I was growing up, because every once in a while, even at the age I'm at now, I find not just great comfort in looking at these things, but inspiration about me as a young person. This is an ego thing. This is looking at the 12-year-old Roberta. This is looking at the 25-year-old Roberta. This is looking at someone in their 30s who still wasn't an astronaut, but who had these dreams, this skill set, this determination, this curiosity, this energy, this great energy, to try to make the world a better place, to try to do something that was really important to her fellow human beings. I mean, that's the value system my sister and I grew up with. And I go and look at that cabinet sometimes and see the things that my sister and I had made together as kids, were pictures, black and white pictures of us, and they give me great courage. They remind me of that 18-year-old self that could have had that letter. And I look at it all the time. And I'm reminded of who I am and who I was and who I should continue to be as long as I'm neurologically intact to understand it.
Right. It's hard to hear some of the stories about the mistreatment, I guess, or just the disrespect, or the tall poppy syndrome, I guess, as you call it. And I'm sure we're just touching the first layer of the onion with stories like this. Like, are you, you've achieved tremendous things, but in spite of this, really, like, do you look back at that? Do you think this is do we chalk this up to humanity, envy? Is it just misogyny? Like, what, or is it all those things?
I think you pick a number.
Pick a number.
I mean, I don't think everybody was like that in those days.
Course.
I just think people who were in roles of responsibility didn't really live up to what they could have. Let's put it that way. And I survived in spite of them. I don't have the pension the rest have because they did that to me. And I don't have necessarily the same kind of prestige because I only flew once. They made sure that happened. And I could have been the first woman to do a spacewalk, but they made sure that didn't happen. I mean, there's a whole list that could keep on and on, but I don't perseverate about that. I don't obsess about that. It was a long time before I could talk about it without being so annoyed with them. And then, you just don't let somebody... The best revenge is success. And I feel that I don't have to look at people on television if I don't want to look at them on television. I don't have to answer phone calls. I don't go to reunions of the astronaut program. I mean, I kindly abstain. I'm not mean about it, but I don't want to put myself amongst people that I know were not very nice to me.
Wow.
I don't need to give them my time.
Right.
I would rather have that time with birds that will live way beyond any of us, and hopefully can make people a little bit gentler and a little bit more connected ethically and morally to the world around us that has other incredible things in it.
Given that you do so much photography work, and I've seen some of like these lenses you're using, like this is serious equipment. Do you share a lot of that on like social media or not really? Like,
I'm really bad at that, and I was told I should spend 8 minutes a day on social media. To tell you the truth, I like that 8 minutes to do more research work. It's not that I don't want to be connected with people. I have a Twitter account, and I was better at it 18 months ago than I am now.
Right.
I don't feel like I need to have. I don't feel my personal need for it. Now I know the publisher is going to say you got to have, and I will hire someone rather than do that. If I have the funds from royalties from a book, I will hire someone to. I mean, years and years and years ago, when emails first started, Arthur C. Clarke, who should be very famous to people who are listening to this, Arthur C. Clarke told me once. He said, I had to hire 3 people to answer the mail. I had to pay for them, to hire them, to get them to answer all this mail. And I have people that answer mail. I don't have as much as Arthur C. Clarke ever would have had, but I get people wanting autographs and things. And I know that just because I've done what I've done in the past, and that's okay. But with current stuff, I let my foundation speak for me.
Right.
So my foundation, and my sister, who is 18 months older than me, is really a creative genius. She does a lot of the creatives for the foundation. She does all the stuff on the website. We have a fantastic coordinator that works in the office who does all the Facebook stuff. Mm-hmm. So I'm gifted by having great people who can do the social media stuff for me. It's not that I don't like people, but telling the truth,
it's time issue.
There's only one of me, and there's lots of people who can do the communication for things. I send pictures. I get people to go away on field trips. We have pictures taken. We send them out, and so I change my name when I'm on a field trip, So my name goes from Roberta to Roberta, R-O-B-I-R-D, and we put the B-I-R-D in uppercase, right? So where's Roberta today? And so my sister puts all these little puzzles out for schools and hints, and sort of gets people interested in looking up where I've been. And we have all the connections to all the Parks Canada.
Cute.
So that's what we do.
That's great. We'll get ready to wrap up. I do want to know, just for a point of curiosity, of all the space movies that are out there, do you have any that are
I
actually...
have one favorite, like a real favorite.
Which is it?
Galaxy Quest.
I've never heard of it.
Oh my goodness.
What is that?
Oh,
I thought you were going to say 2001.
No.
It's certainly not
No,
Star Wars.
2001, there's part of it I like, but
Okay.
no, Galaxy Quest. Galaxy Quest is Alan Rickman in it. You know, the guy who played Severus Snape?
Of course.
You got Tim Allen in it, Sigourney Weaver in it. No, I mean, really, you should go read it. It's hilarious. It's a spoof.
Oh,
it's a spoof
okay.
on retired people from an old television program. And it is so funny because Alan Rickman is the character's like Mr. Spock, only instead of Mr. Spock's ears, he's got this head like like the brains. It's just absolutely hilarious. And Sigourney, I mean, it's just, it's a delight.
I'm going to rent
is
it
a
tonight.
delight.
I'll get it tonight.
If you don't laugh,
Never heard of it.
to me, it's a classic.
Okay. I'm looking forward to it.
I smile just thinking about it. In fact, maybe I'll go home and
You have a
I
big
got the
smile.
DVD. I'll go watch it tonight.
So we mentioned, or I mentioned 2001 Space Odyssey, and so there's the last thing I want to bring up is a cute little story that, again, you can tell if this is true or not at the end of the movie. So for anyone who's seen the movie, or you can go, it's on YouTube. At the end of the movie, there's this little embryo in this sort of amniotic sac, kind of with the music, and that's the end of the movie. And he's got these kind of weird eyes, and you recreated that moment on the space shuttle. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I think we all try to do something a little different. Now, I did something that most people want to do something with the cameras on, right? Because they want to be the
Instagram,
first
their moment,
to whatever. No. And every astronaut's trying to outdo another astronaut. But I had a personal moment. I mean, a lot of things I did on the flight were for other people. I took up cookies for Girl Guides, for example, and took various types of crests. But this one moment I wanted to do for myself because where the galley was right beside the bathroom area, and you had to pull these curtains, these louvered curtains around, and there was also a window to the planet. And I remember I just saw that embryo moment, and I had all my clothes off because I was just doing my sponge bath, and I tucked up like that embryo and just spun without anything touching me in full view of the Earth, just like that. And I don't know if you're aware of this. I told this to somebody once, and they said, "Weren't you afraid of being seen?" I'm going like, really? 300 kilometers above the Earth, traveling at Mach 25? No one's going to be seeing me out the window.
So cool.
It was hilarious.
And I don't know if this is true, but there's a scene like that in the movie Gravity. And I know that there's a connection, I think, between you and Sandra Bullock. Like, were you a consultant on that movie? Or because you've seen the movie, obviously.
Yep.
And just, it's a shitstorm. Like, everything's going wrong, and like, how could it get worse? And George Clooney flies away into space. And she does the moment. She's got her clothes on, but she does the little fetus floating moment. Was that an homage to you?
Oh, I doubt it. No, I didn't.
Modest.
No. I didn't meet Sandra Bullock till after the movie, so I can't.
Really?
Unless you heard about it from somebody else, because it's one of those classic things. But no, I met her on the red carpet at TIFF when the movie was there, and she and I met afterwards, and she said, "Well, how did I do?" And I thought, well, I've been telling my friends that she'd be dead within a second after any of that stuff she had done. So my friends are always saying, "Now don't tell her the truth." So she said, "How did I do?" So I'd thought about what my answer was going to be, because I was sure she's going to ask me this. So I said, that wide base gate, that was, when you came out of that pond at the end of the movie, I said, that was just so perfectly done. She said, I practiced that. Because she had other astronaut consultants on it. But no, she'd have been dead in a nanosecond with some of that stuff she was doing.
What's it like watching a space movie with you? Are you kind of kiboshing everything, or do you let it soak in?
Well, it's had its run with me. I started out by being in the era of the movie, the Right Stuff, right? So the Right Stuff movie came out in the early 1980s, at the time when they were interviewing us for the space program. And people would want to take me to that movie. I think I saw it like 13 or 14 times. People keep taking me to see my reaction to the movie, and then to say, "Well, was that what it was like? Is that what it's like?" And I mean, really, I know every line from that movie.
Really,
every line. A long movie.
And was that the most realistic in terms of your experience? Like, of all the movies out there, like Star Trek, obviously, Star Wars, those are like just ridiculous.
They are ridiculous. Well, they're very
entertaining.
Who knows if they're going to be anything like the future?
Yeah.
I don't know. I sometimes think back when I was growing up, and I very much liked the old black and white series with Buster Crabbe, Flash Gordon.
Oh, yeah.
So much so that when I was in France learning French, I was there for about a month at one point in my stellar career, and I would watch Flash Gordon in French to learn French, and it was wonderful to be able to do that, to see all these rocket ships and hear the fusée and hear all these other things. And it was really kind of fun. So these days with some of the, there's so much CGI happening. Some of them it gets a little bit.
And you can tell too, like the eye can tell.
Some of it gets a little bit.
Cheeseball.
Yeah, really.
So where can people, if they want to follow the foundation or donate to the cause, how can they do that? Where can they find you?
Sure. The website is, the shortcut to the website is www.therbf.org. And if you don't have the in front of RBF, you get to some strange place in the States. But anyway, it's also the Roberta Bondar Foundation.org, but there's usually so many spelling errors in that we decided to shorten it as well.
Smart. Anything else you want to chat about before we wrap up?
No, it's been great, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to even speak for a few minutes about my fine feathered friends.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Once again, a tremendous thank you to Dr. Roberta Bondar for making the time in her busy schedule to chat with me. I hope you enjoyed it, and I want to thank you once again for listening. If you haven't taken an opportunity to do so, please subscribe to the show and leave a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.